Hey everybody, welcome to this week's session of week 14. We're going to be talking about leading teams. So let me just jump right into it. So let's talk about what's going to be on the agenda for today. So as typical, we're going to talk about some BAU stuff, and then we're going to jump into managing motivation and overcoming obstacles. We talked about it slightly last class at the tail end of it, but what I want to do now is actually dive deeper into it to kind of figure out all the nuances of it. Then we're going to jump into the prospect theory and group thinking. And then we're going to jump into performance management and conflict management. And then we'll end it off with just discussing some upcoming deliverables that you have for next week and then the week after. So let's jump right into it, some BAU stuff. So I just finished grading up the group assignment number 5, and so for that one, everybody had the class average was about an 87.5. There were some assignments that weren't corrected, so I knocked off some points off for that. But for the most part, it seems like everybody did pretty well on this assignment, and I'm super excited to see what the presentations will look like for next week. And just as a reminder, all grades are up to date. The only thing that are pending is the group presentation that will happen next week, and then the peer evaluation that will happen in 2 weeks. You'll submit it, right? I think it's December 5th. Or sorry, December 2nd. I can't remember exactly what date, but it's before the semester ends. And then it's before the semester ends after the group presentation. And then for quiz 4, that will also happen the week of finals week. And that's only if it's applicable. So if you did pretty well the first three assignments, then this one should be pretty good for you. Let me just make sure I have everything on. Okay, perfect. So let's jump right into motivation. So last class we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in business, and we touched upon it a little bit. This right here is the hierarchy for what it seems like in the business world, right? So in the very bottom we have, having a good working environment, and then as we go up, we treating with respect, belongingness, sense of community, and then recognition, and then creating and envisioning, thinking big, right? So this is kind of how we see it in the business world, and typically this is kind of how people feel, right? You want to have a good environment, you want to be treated well, you want to belong to the environment, you want to be recognized for the work that you do, and you want to be able to envision and create for the future for that business. Next, we get into two-factor theory. So, right, as we discussed before, right, we have two different things that we have going on here, right? On the left side here, we have influenced by motivators, such as accomplishments, recognition, responsibility. And then on the right side, we have job dissatisfaction, which is considered by influence by hygienes, which in this situation is that, if you have bad working conditions, bad coworkers relations, politics, bureaucracy, supervision, and wages, they all kind of factor into being dissatisfied with work. Next, we talked about the other two-factor theory, right? Or actually, not two-factor theory. Sorry, this one is actually X and Y theory. So for this one here, right, there's two type of theories that people need to either be closely supervised, right? That's theory X, and then theory Y is to say that let's allow people to be independent. So these two approaches are widely different, right? They're kind of like con- contradicting itself, right? So, and then if you think about looking on the left side of the theory X, we have desire of only working for money, right? But people naturally just want to work, just to work, right? If you won't be able to do a lot outside of going on vacations and such. So people naturally want to work if it's for money, for nonprofits, for startups. Inherently, we want to work. We want to create something, so that's why these two theories are widely different, since theory X believes that kind of people aren't responsible enough. People shouldn't have autonomy, and theory Y believes that people are responsible. People are responsible, and people should have autonomy. So now let's jump into some new material. So we're going to be talking about proactively motivating strategies within project management, right? So what does proactive motivation means? In this sense, we're talking about it as the proactive, but in the sense of project management, we look at it in the sense of strategies that can convey and maintain high levels of team engagement. So basically, rather than just waiting for problems to arise or waiting for demotivators, you kind of proactively developing methods and way you could motivate your employees, or in the sense of project management, the people that are working with you, so the developers, some key stakeholders. And it's super important, right? Because you always want to foster a good team that is highly motivated. If the team is motivated to do different things, they're willing to take on more challenges and develop and create new stuff. So we talked about this before, setting clear, achievable goals, right? This is that SMART goals that we talked about in the beginning of the semester, right? And this the same rule applies within motivation, right? So goals should be clear, achievable, and aligned with the project objectives within the team member's personal aspiration. So as you remember, I talked about before that when we want to motivate people, you can't motivate across the board, right? You can't have one thing and everybody would be perfectly fine with it. You have to understand individuals and you have to understand what motivates them. In my line of work, I always want to know what I can do to help somebody feel motivated. So if somebody wants to build up on new skills, right? So I try to make sure that I can put projects, I can put tasks in their way that will allow them to explore new skills rather than providing them the same old thing that they already know. And you have to understand individuals to be able to help motivate them. So if you don't have that conversation and early on discussions, I think then you are setting yourself up for some sort of failure, and that it wouldn't allow you to really utilize your teammates or the people below you. And the example that we have here is the software development project. A clear goal could be develop and launch a user-friendly mobile app within 6 months, ensuring it meets all specific user requirements and passes all quality testing. This goal is both specific, time-bound, and aligns with the team's capability of the project. As we talked about before, right? This is using the method of the SMART framework here. Now, inclusive goal setting, right? So what this means is that like we want to make sure that we get all involving team members in goal setting. So we want to make sure that everybody that's part of the team is able to contribute to making sure that the goal is there, and making sure that it's realistic, right? I think a lot of companies and a lot of team has these very ambitious goals that are not achievable. And what happens when they're not achieved? The team morale goes down because you couldn't accomplish X, Y, and Z. But X, Y, and Z was a problem because it was never going to be attainable. So understanding having a realistic and relevant goals can definitely help teams and organizations prosper. So again, remember fostering a positive team culture, and as a project manager, you're actively trying to create this environment of trust, respect, and collaboration, and it's super important. Especially what I do in my day to day, right? I want to make sure that I'm always open to people. I'm always able to be reached at any sort of given time during the working hours, that I'm just a ping away. But I also want to make sure that my teammates and the people that I work with on projects can trust me, can trust that I can get the work done, and can trust that I am reliable. And as project managers, you want to make sure that everybody in the team kind of feels that sense of trust to you and amongst each other. Respect and collaboration is always a hand to hand. um, just because you're working with somebody doesn't mean you have to like them, but you have to respect them enough to understand that the work needs to get done. Right? You will come across people that you don't, that you're not too friendly with, or you don't click right away, and that's perfectly fine. This isn't an environment in which that we're trying to create this fake happiness. What I always advocate is that you just respect each other and respect the work. Um, and being able to collaborate with each other is such a big step. And some actions that we can do is regularly do team meetings, transparent communication, recognition of small wins. This one is a big one because a lot of companies and a lot of teams don't celebrate small wins. In some way, they think of it as like bad luck, right? Before the big win. But I'm always an advocate that any win that you get, celebrate it, be happy about it. That builds more motivation and it builds more momentum to reaching the next goal. So those are some actions that we can take. And then, coming off of that, right, we're going to talk about recognition and rewards within project management. If you remember, I believe it was last week's discussion, and I discussed about how are we going to. I proposed the discussion question of your team is demotivated, they missed the deadline, what would you do, right? And some of you actually said, I'll give them money, I'll give them a pizza party, happy hour. So these are some of the things um, that we discussed within class. So let's talk about some other things that we can do and kind of like understand the entire rewarding system within project management as a whole. So why is it important, right? So again, boost morale, enhance engagement, and encourage performance, right? The people that are motivated, people that are recognized, are going to be striving to perform better, to continuously improve upon their performance. I'll give you an example within work. Right, we have something called high five, which is a little recognition from a teammate or a manager or whomever to kind of say, hey, like you're doing really well. Like this is me recognizing that you're doing well, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. Right, and it's a very small thing. It's just a little high five, um, and that may not seem like much, but within teams that you're working consistently, to get that recognition from a peer or a manager or within the project, it can make all the difference. So recognition is a super big thing, and these are some of the things that it can actually help. So we'll talk more about some forms of recognition. So there's a formal form, right? Is an award, a promotion, formal acknowledgement during meetings or through company communication, right? Emails are very big. Sometimes you'll have stakeholders email your boss or your boss's boss and say like, look, Omid has done an amazing job. I am so glad he's on this project. And that's a formal recognition that is really valuable. And these kind of recognitions can actually go a long way if you think about it, because when it comes time for like yearly evaluations or promotions, these small little formal recognitions can help build a case for a promotion. And then there's some other informal recognitions. Like as I mentioned, we have a high five thing, right? So as a personal thank you note, we have verbal praises, small gestures of appreciation, right? It could be coffee. Your manager could take you out for coffee, or um, any sort of form that can help recognize that you're doing a good job or they appreciate the work that you're doing. And then, some examples here is a employee of the month and a project team. So recognizing outstanding team members monthly basis is a big thing. I used to have that when I used to work in retail at Office Depot. We used to have a employee of the month, and it definitely helps strive other employees to like, okay, like this month is going to be my month. I'm gonna be the employee of the month. So it definitely builds that motivation. Some other ones are some professional development opportunities, right? So offering training, certificates, or attending at a conference as a reward for exceptional work, right? So if you've done really well in a certain area, you might actually be told, hey, like we love the work that you're doing. We want you to improve and be better at something that you're already great at. We here go to this conference, or here's some additional training that we think that you'll be great for. And then in some ways, when we talk about project management, there are project completion bonuses, right? So some companies will tell their project managers, "Hey, listen, if you guys can complete this project by X date, you guys will get an incentive." Right? So just kind of giving that boost of like motivation and being able to help move the team faster if need be. Cool. So and then actually on top of that, we talk about fostering growth, right? So when sorry, one second. So when we talk about fostering growth, right, there's like fostering growth is a big motivator for a lot of people. And some importance of it is like long-term engagement, skill enhancement, and succession planning, right? So when we talk about growth opportunity, I always like to think of it as like I want to build the people around me. I want to build them up enough so one day if they want to take my position, if I go to a different company or if I get promoted, that I know somebody within my teams are well equipped, right? That's just preparing the people around you for any potential boost, bonus, or any growth opportunities. And I think that's a super big thing when companies focus on growth. You'll hear that a lot, right? Sometimes people will say, "Okay, well, I graduated from undergrad and I went to a job that maybe I wasn't in a position I wanted to be in, but I got my foot in the door and I want to grow." Some companies are very well known to growing their employees. Um, I know a lot within where I am. It's we focus a lot of like internal growth, right, which is great for internal. So these kind of things definitely help shape the future of future leaderships because they know that they have a spot within any sort of organization. So encouraging growth, right? So identifying individual aspirations. As I mentioned before, it is super, super big to talk with people and understand what makes them motivated. Is it money? Is it opportunity? Is it skill setting? It could be a whole range of things, right? So identifying it early can help you understand where they're going to go and how to get them there. Mentorship programs, right? And this one is a big one too, right? A lot of companies will do peer mentorship. So maybe a first year employee will be matched up with like a fifth year or a fourth year, whatever it may be, to kind of show them the ropes and help them understand what they're going to be experiencing in the next couple of years, or I'll have it where I'm a program manager and I may have other people from different teams reach out to me, say, hey, I'm doing this job, but I want to one day get to where you're at. How does that work? And I do that a lot too with my own peers, right? People that are in higher positions than me, I kind of say, I try to pick their brain of understanding, hey, this is where I am, but I want to get to somewhere that you are. How does that work? Right. So mentorship programs within companies are super, super big, and fostering that is a huge plus on the organization side and building that culture. Cross-functional exposure, right? So as I mentioned, somebody from a different workflow or work team can tell me, "Hey, I'm doing this today, but maybe tomorrow, or hypothetically in the future, I want to do what you're doing. How do I get there?" So kind of exposing them to small little things that you do to kind of get their brains going, and kind of forge a path that may have not been there if they'd never reached out. So some examples of it, right? So rotating assignments. This is some big in companies, right? They do like rotating. A lot of undergrad going into their entry level jobs are rotations. So you'll have maybe like a year, 2 year rotations where every 6 months you're in a different part of the business, and it kind of exposes you to different areas of the business. And then at the end of it, I think in some places they'll let you pick where you want to go. Sponsored education and training, right? So basically, as I mentioned before, right, if a company believes that they would benefit from you getting like a PMP, they will actually pay for it. They'll sponsor it. And same thing with leadership development programs, right? A lot of universities have these where if you want to go and brush up on your leadership skills, right? Some companies might pay for you to go back to school, right? Some companies paid for you to go get your master's or MBA or some leadership executive certificate. So these are all ways that developing opportunities within a project. I know it doesn't seem like a project because we're talking about like project managers, but understanding how you can help is the biggest thing, and the biggest thing you can do to kind of help motivate your teammates. So best practices, right? So making sure that you always align with the organization's goals, regular review and adjustments, and then we recognize of accomplishments, right? So all three things that we've talked about before, super important things, and they should be kind of done proactively versus retroactively. When I talk about retroactively, I'm talking about once somebody complains about X, Y, and Z, then you do something actually that's reactiveness. So we want to proactively, so before we do anything, before there's any fuss, before there's any complaints, we want to make sure that we're providing these opportunities as leaders, as project managers, and as um, future leaders in a sense. Cool. So we're gonna next talk about the prospect theory. We talked about it just slightly, and I mentioned it very briefly, and I wanted to talk a lot about it. So we're actually going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about it in the sense of group decision making. Last week we talked about it in the sense of individual decision making. So we'll touch a little bit about individual, and then we'll talk more about the group decision making process. So let's talk about prospect theory and understand what is prospect theory within the sense of project management. So prospect theory again was developed by Dale Economy and Amos, I cannot say his last name, in 1979. They developed a really great book called Thinking Fast and Slow, um, based on this idea of the prospect theory and some more theories. But in a nutshell, they are basically a local psychological theory that describes how people choose between different probabilities. Whoa, let me say that again. The idea was like, how do people decide between different probability and all and alternatives involving risks where the probabilities of the outcomes are uncertain, right? So as I mentioned, there was an example that I mentioned within class of like um, people are more risk adverse, they're more scared to take risks. So prospect theory kind of dives deep into that. But before we dive into prospect theory, we have to talk about the traditional utility theory, which was a theory prior to this that said that traditionally this theory assumed that people make rational choices based on maximized expected utility. So what that just means is that people are more rational, right? This utility theory said people are rational, and then prospect theory basically says the opposite, that they value gains and losses differently, leading to irrational decision making under risks. So remember, all this is contingent under risks. So let's dive into it. So what is the relevancy of prospect theory within project management? Why do we even care about this? So the relevancy is actually pretty big, right? So project managers often face decisions under uncertainty, right? You don't know the timeline, you don't know the budget, you don't know a whole bunch of things, and there's a lot of risks involved. So understanding how people perceive gains and losses can inform better decision making within project management. So let's dive into an example. Consider a project manager deciding whether to adopt a new technology for their project. So, according to the utility theory, the project manager would be subjective, weighing the pros and cons, right? But however, we believe within within prospect theory that they might overvalue potential losses. So, time, cost overrun, compared to gains, improved efficiency, leading to more um, conservative decisions. So, we'll dive more deep into this. So, what are some points that of prospect theory that actually enable this type of understanding? So, we'll talk about the different definitions, kind of give us some examples of what each thing means and how does it relate to project management. So, the first one is we're going to talk about a reference point, right? So, you always need some sort of reference point when we talk about prospect theory. So, this is just the basis of comparing whether a value is gain or loss. We need to understand, are we gaining or we're losing, right? That's our reference point. So, in this example for project management, a project manager might view project outcomes related to initial budget or schedule. For instance, spending less than the budget amount is seen as a gain, right? So, we're spending less money, while exceeding it is potential loss, meaning that if we go over, we're over budget, then we're losing, quote unquote, over the project value, right? So, you have to understand what are you gaining, what are you losing, and how does this relate. Then we talk about loss adverse. So this is basically the tendency to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains. So what does this mean? Within project management, we talk about it as the risk management, and project managers might prefer to avoid potential losses. So a delay in schedule, you might want to avoid it more strongly than achieving a gain. So completing a task ahead of schedule, right? So if you are given this opportunity that you can either be late on a schedule or you could be ahead of a schedule by doing something, if both probabilities are uncertain, people will more likely not want to lose, even though that they could potentially gain um, by taking this risk. So again, this goes to overthinking, and then we kind of over allocate resources to mitigate smaller risks. So this is where it becomes problematic, right? People are just do not want to lose. People do not want to take bad risks. Next, we talk about diminishing sensitivity, right? So this impacts the change of this impact of change decreases as the distance from the reference point increases. So what does that mean? That means that in this example, that the difference between a project being under budget by $1,000 or $2,000 might be more significant than a difference between under budget by 11,000 or 12,000. Similarly, small delays might be seen as more critical relevant to larger delays. So basically, I'd rather be under budget. So being under budget is we think about what's the difference between that, right? So 1,000, 2,000 is a difference of 1,000. So what it's saying here that it is more significant between um, might be seen as more significant than having it by 11,000 or 12,000. So when we understand that what's it called? We understand that the difference between it might be under by the certain amount of number. This will become more problematic when it becomes to think about larger ones, right? So we look at 1 to 2,000 as a major thing versus 11 to 12,000. Um, that's what it means because in this sense we look at it that um, the impact of the change decreases as the distance from the reference point is different. Uh, so that leads us to the next point of risk attitudes and gains or losses. So definition for this is that people are risk adverse, as I mentioned before, and the domain of gain and loss, seeking in the domain of losses. So what does that mean? That means that when a project manager is progressing well, that's a gain. A project manager might avoid taking risks that jeopardizes success. So if you're doing really well, basically anything that could cause you to not do well, you'll kind of avoid it, no matter what it could do in a way that could potentially be positive versus negative, right? So if you're doing well, like what is the saying? It says that like once you're in motion, you want to stay in motion, and if you're doing well, you want to continuously do well. So that's what that means here. And then basically, what is all this in the impact of decision making, right? So the implications of this is that the um, the decision making within a project can be detrimental because some of these risks can become more problematic than it was actually originally known as, right? We are very risk adverse, as I mentioned, and we will kind of do everything to avoid the risks. But in and of itself, that is of a risk, right? So then we look into what is considered how do we strategize against this idea. So when we talk about it, I mentioned here that project managers need to be aware of these biases to make more balanced and objective decisions, right? So more based on data, more based on numbers, than having a subjective more on feelings and how you perceive it yourself. Nice. So now, how does prospect theory involved within individual decision making? So basically, as we talked about, right? So how project manager assesses risk and make decisions, and then we talk about some of the probabilities, the smallest. So tendency to overweigh small probabilities and underestimate large ones. So we look at a risk as like, oh, this is a 15% chance of happening, right? Versus a 60% chance of happening, right? We tend to overweigh the small 15% more than the 60%. Because the reference point here is zero, right? An example of this is a project manager may overestimate the likelihood of a rare event, derailing the project, leading to overly cautious or conservative decisions. Um, we tend to, in project managers, and I'm accused of this as well, we tend to look at something as like, you know we know that something rarely ever happens, but we have to consider it, and sometimes we put too much attention on this rare occasion that it throws us off, and we kind of miss the bigger, more likely things to happen, just because we focus so much of our time on that rare event. So real world application, right? And the biggest one here is the sunk cost fallacy. You might have heard this a lot, and it's a continuously failing at a project due to prior investment, right? So think about this in your own sense. If you're ever working on something and you just know it's not working, if you're ever working on a website and you know it sucks, you just know it's bad, but you're like, I spent 5 hours working on this. I can't redo it. I can't do another one. I'm just going to continue it on, knowing that even though the more you do, the worse it gets. You're in the sunk cost fallacy, right? You wasted enough time that you've now wasted. Sorry, you've invested enough time that now you look at it as like a huge investment. So now, if you if you stop, then it becomes a loss. So the world of stocks works the same way, right? When we invest money into a certain company, and your stock goes down. Let's say you bought it at $10 and now it's at $3, $2, $1. You'll continuously have your money in there because technically to you it is never a loss until you pull out your money. And a lot of people think like that, right? But that's your sunk cost fallacy there. Implications for project managers, right? So just awareness, make sure that your biases is checked. If you need tools to mitigate irrational decision making, right? So structured decision making frameworks. So seek external opinions, periodically review meetings with unbiased stakeholders, right? Within projects, if you believe a certain thing is a risk, right? I always say that get multiple opinions. You should be good. So this actually should be group one. Prospect area within group dynamics. So when we talk about dynamics, what are we talking about here? So group dynamic refers to the behavior and psychological process that occurs within social groups or between social groups. So in this context of project management, understanding group dynamic is essential for effective decision making, particularly under conditions of risk and uncertainty. So we'll talk more about that right now. So for this one here, very well diverse groups are super important to have, right? Because you have different perspectives, different background, different education, different experiences. So having people across the board when it comes to risks from different areas and getting multiple different opinions is super important. In this example here, right, we talk about that in the project group, one member might have a risk adverse perspective due to past experience. Somebody in your team might want to not take risk because in the past, the risk was, detrimental or whatever happens. While others might be more risk tolerant, um, which means that they want to take the risks. So now you have a nice, good balance of individuals. So let me see what we have here. Okay, so let's go back here. Let's continue this on the next video. I'm going to talk next about social influence and interpersonal dynamics.